Welcome back to the Mining Pod, y'all, and a happy Tuesday to everyone. Today, we've got a banger show for y'all with Brad Cuddy from Cholla Energy. He's going to be going through some of the finer points of all of the different cooling apparatuses for Bitcoin mining, from air to immersion to hydro. And we're going to touch on some Texas power market stuff as well. I know y'all always love that. We love a good free power market here on the Mining Pod. But before we hop into it, let's get a quick word from our sponsors.
Accelerated by Compass is the premier accelerator program for Bitcoin mining sites at any stage of development. Our managed services provide expert guidance in site procurement, construction, energy agreements, and mining operations. Compass helps clients meet timelines and expectations for operational excellence, from greenfield to retrofits and everything in between. Don't just mine, excel. Visit compassmining.io now to discover how Accelerated by Compass can power your success.
Are you a retail or institutional investor interested in Bitcoin mining companies? The Miner Mag brings you free data and analysis from all major NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin mining operations to know who stands out. Check out visualized metrics and data-dependent stories at theminermag.com.
And we're back, and I would love to welcome Brad Cuddy to the stage. Brad, my man, how we doing?
Good, Colin. How are you, man?
Pretty good, brother. You know, fall's easing in over here. Weather's cooling down. Really looking forward to cozy season. It's the best stretch of the year.
Agreed. We're enjoying it here in Texas. Finally,
yes.
Below 90s. In the morning, it's 70 degrees. You can actually enjoy a hot cup of coffee. So
right. I feel like a lot of the folks moving to Texas, and I've never lived there, but I'm from Tennessee, so similar climate, although sometimes more brutal in Texas. They were not ready for the fact that you don't just get hit with the heat, but the humidity as well. And I'm sure we'll be able to talk a lot about that when we talk about different cooling systems. But before we jump into the nitty gritty of it, we'd just love for you to give a quick background and bio on yourself. Let the folks get to know you a little bit if they don't already.
Yeah, so actually background is petroleum engineering. Studied that at Penn State. Always had a passion for energy and wanted to get involved in some way. Ended up working at a service company, Schlumberger, all across the world in the North Sea, Persian Gulf, Gulf of Mexico, Prudhoe Bay. Saw a lot of cool places. Saw some massive flares. There was one job in Qatar. We flared 100 million cubic feet a day. Putting that into a gas Jenny is like half a gigawatt worth of power. And that was when I was already orange pilled. So I was like, man, this is such a waste. So I was trying to find a way to combine my passion for Bitcoin and then my oil and gas experience and energy experience. And just via Twitter DMs, I got a hold of Austin Storms, who brought me on to work with Marty, Tom, Todd, and the crew over at Great American Mining. So spent about a year there. We deployed 16 megawatts worth of flare mitigation up in North Dakota and Montana, the eastern part. We were acquired by Crusoe. I helped rationalize the assets there and then had the opportunity to come join the Cholla team under Gideon and Clayton to kind of kick off Cholla's R&D innovation lab out in West Texas, where we're mining Bitcoin on grid with different cooling technologies, basically A/B testing things, seeing what works the best, providing that information to partners, trying to inform how data centers could come out to West Texas, and just really, really trying to get into the nitty gritty and understand what works best in our current location.
So 2 things from that bio, immediate takeaways. Number 1, I did the Napoleon Dynamite quesadilla thing and called it Cholla. I'm sure that this is not the first time, but my gringo ass is butchering the name Cholla Energy. Number 2, your employment and career trajectory in Bitcoin mining is amazingly prototypical in some ways, because not only is it the oil and gas to Bitcoin mining pipeline, very strong, synergies there. We love it. But also the Twitter hire. I feel like that is something that is not unique to our industry, but you hear so many stories of guys just taking their shot on Twitter with some of these other companies and professionals and just shooting that DM. For anyone listening to this, I've gotten jobs this way. Just do it. just don't what do you have to lose, right? And it's such an electric industry that we can do things like that, So I could probably grill you for the entire day on just the oil and gas stuff that you've done. Maybe we should do another pod episode at some times. I find that industry just super interesting because it's abstracted away from everything that we do, and we don't realize how much goes into getting gas to market. And I think most people would be, kind of blown away by the complexities of that. I mean, the 1 gigawatt worth of energy being burned a day in just this one rig is just an incredible stat. But we didn't come here to talk about oil and gas, unfortunately. We did come here to talk about ASICs. So Cholla runs, as far as I know from talking to you, air, hydro, and immersion, or has run a combination of the three in the past. Like you said, y'all have A/B tested. Just can you give us a high-level overview of maybe each individual system? And then after that, some of the considerations that make either one of these or a combination of these your favorite to run.
Yeah, sure. We're actually running all three, and I don't know of any other site that is actually running three at one place. So I think we're proud to say that we're one of the only ones doing that.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I really wanted to have you on. I mean, when we've talked a few times at conferences, and it was almost like finding a unicorn, because I've always been fascinated with this, with all the different complexities that go into running each different model. And so when we were talking, the light bulb went off. It's like, this is the guy to talk to about this.
So we started with air, wanted to keep it simple. We're not going to be the biggest miner, but we want to partner with folks that we believe in, want to see succeed, and want to give them a place to test their product in West Texas in a pretty harsh environment. So our first boxes were upstream data, the 900 kW hash huts. The first versions, one came straight from Empower and shipped to our West Texas yard. So we put S19J Pros, 240 of them, in one of the units, and then we put 240 M30S pluses in the other unit. And we've just been running them side by side, comparing, what type of failures, how many failures, their performance in the heat, in the cold, and whatnot. And then moving on to our second deployment, we partnered with Giga. We purchased their very first hydro integrated 45-foot shipping container skid, where you've got the server room, the CDU, which is the cooling distribution unit, and then the dry cooler all in one package. We went with WhatsMiner on that one, just kind of an assessment of Bitmain's water-cooled product and the hoses and leak points and failure rates and what we've heard about the ant spaces. And kind of the need, at least originally, Bitmain they weren't interested in dry coolers. They wanted you to be using a evaporative cooling tower or something like that. And so WhatsMiner, just from our experience, was a little more robust and had a higher operating range of temperatures. And so that would allow us to run into those temps in the summertime. So we've got that deployed. That was deployed in January with the Giga team. And then we deployed a single loop, single phase, immersion cooled M56S++, so like the WhatsMiner immersion ready unit. And we used the Hayden immersion and Hayden cooler systems for that. So built a building, put some skids in there, dropped the miners in, and that's been running since late February, early March of this year. So we've ran them all now through the summertime side by side, and have had the opportunity to see what we like the best, and what seems to be working the best for us.
So before I grill you one more time on which one you've enjoyed the most, I put a pin in something there. Could you go into a little more detail about the difference between Bitmain and MicroBT's hydro solutions? Because I think this is something I didn't appreciate at first, is that the cooling apparatus is actually different for both of those.
Yeah, and I'll caveat it with, the new Bitmain server is seemingly redesigned, that US, 3-phase 800 terahash miner that they're putting out with HUD 8's R&D. But originally, the Bitmain servers had, I think, like 6 distinct like hoses, or at least 6 connection points. That like the more connection points you have, and the more water you have running in hoses, like the more opportunity you have for leaks and leak paths and just issues. And additionally, the water hose connections were on the same side as the power. So what's miners are unique, where the power and Ethernet are on one side, and then the back side of the miner is where you hook up the quick connects. So it's just a little bit of a different system. When you're working with water, obviously water and electricity is not a good mix. So to just mitigate the risk, especially because we're smaller, leaner team, might not be manned all the time, we just felt safer with the What's Miner solution.
And that's because of what specifically about it? Is it because it's closed loop? How does that work? The evaporative versus the dry?
Well, sorry, I was talking more of like the hosing and like the piping of actually the servers, but the evaporative versus the dry, we're an oil company. We drill oil wells. Like we're not afraid of producing energy and using it, but it did seem a little weird to drill a water well just to evaporate it for mining Bitcoin out in the deserts of West Texas. So we and also just a sense of keeping it simple. We didn't want to be, drilling for water wells and then treating the water, monitoring it, making sure we're not having any contaminants like going on evaporative pads or a chiller or anything like that. So we decided to go with the dry cooler solution that What's Miner had.
Yeah, that's one thing I've always wondered about Bitmain leaning into hydro a lot. Is a lot of the places where this is most useful for their design, or at least their first rollouts, water is scarce, right? You think about Texas, West Texas, you think about maybe the Middle East or something like that. And that always seemed to be it was a mental block for me because I didn't understand how you would actually make that work. Could you explain just a little bit more for my Oonga Boonga brain on these types of things, how the dry cooling system works? And why it is more robust for those markets where there is less water?
So a dry cooler is essentially just a radiator, right? It's got piping that runs inside of the unit. Across the piping are fins to increase the surface area of contact that the air can have with that hot fluid. And then it's got fans on top that is just sucking air through the fins across the piping. And that in effect cools down your liquid. What's Miners or even Bitmain's units, they can produce 50, 60, 70 degrees C water. Actually, I think What's Miner's got a new unit that's doing 80. I don't think it's commercialized yet. But regardless, you take that and you can cool it down to 4, 5, 6 degrees above ambient with a dry cooler. So say you're outside and it's 30 degrees C, which is in the 90s or low 90s. You can get your inlet fluid to your miners back to about 36, and that's with the dry cooler. The reason why people do use water is by introducing water to the system. You can actually drop the temperature. You can cool your inlet fluid to below what the ambient temperature is. So basically, it comes down to if you're using a dry cooler, you will always have an inlet temperature slightly above your ambient temperature. Okay. Using a cooling tower, a wet cooler, or some type of refrigerant even, you're able to reduce the inlet temperature to your miners below your ambient temperature.
But for using a cooling tower, you have to have a constant supply of water. That's correct? And then so for the What's Miner system, it's closed loop, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And how often do you have to change the water?
We've got a fluid. We worked with Ryan Hawkins. He's like an immersion fluid guru and a water guru, and so he's just formulated our product based off of we have an aluminum hashboard like cold plate, And then we've got a stainless steel piping, and just to make sure that we have like the right corrosion inhibitors, the right percentage of glycol to prevent freezing in the wintertime in West Texas. It's just formulated to, pretty much never have to change it.
Okay, wow, that's impressive. I can see why that would be obviously preferable.
And so for the Bitmain units, and not always are they running new water through their systems. They're likely using the same type of closed loop, but then hitting it on like a brazed plate heat exchanger, which will like swap the or running it through a cooling tower. And the new water system is used to evaporate. It's outside of the closed loop, but you normally want to circulate a fixed volume of water through the miners. And it's just to prevent contaminants and algae growth and all that type of stuff, because that will reduce your ability to cool.
Interested in Bitcoin scaling, startups, or learning more about Bitcoin softworks? Join us Saturday, November 9th at the Fidelity Center in Boston, Massachusetts for Op Next, a one-day conference on scaling Bitcoin hosted by Blockspace Media, the producers of this podcast. Join Bitcoiners like Peter Todd, Portland Hodl, and more to discuss various Bitcoin proposals like OpCat, the Great Script Restoration, CTV, and more. Attend workshops, speaker sessions, and panels discussing the latest in scaling tech, from ZK to ARC to Bitcoin softwork history. And for a limited time, use code OCTOBER to get 25% off a general admission ticket. Find out more by visiting opnext.dev. Again, that's October at opnext.dev. You can find out more by checking out the show notes below.
Between hydro and immersion, which has been, in your opinion, the easiest to manage and the most beneficial in terms of boosting efficiency and hash rate?
So if you design your thermal systems the same, you have the same dry cooler, the same, you're able to get the right flow rates. Strictly from an ease of use, I would say, hydro's cleaner, hydro's quieter, it's a little bit easier. Probably more pleasant to be inside, but immersion works, just as well for us. There's just complications with both. Immersion. I mean, if you get a leak, it's a pain in the ass. With hydro, you're working with the same deal. Like if you get a leak, it's also, it's a fluid, right? They want to get out. You're introducing temperature. You're introducing pressures. It probably both require a more constant eye and attention than you would just like an air unit, right? Like if a leak can be catastrophic compared to, if an air fan stops working, it's, no big deal.
So you kind of lean towards hydro because I feel like this is a huge debate, in terms of form factors beyond air cooling. I've seen takes on both sides of the aisle, whether or not immersion or hydro is better. You have massive miners like Riot going all in on immersion for their Corsicana facility, for instance. And then you have guys on, the other side of the aisle, the always cantankerous, but also always insightful Adam Orthoff from Upstream Data, basically saying that hydro is superior, right? And so I've always been really curious to see which one will win out in the future, because, right now it still seems like air cooled is king, right? And for instance, Bitmain has really leaned into hydro over the last few years. We'll talk a little bit more about their U3 S21 EXPH. If anyone from the Bitmain marketing team is listening to this, please contact me. I've got some ideas about how you can make that a little more palatable, less of a mouthful. But it seems to me like the market is still very much, how should we say, the jury is still out on which of these is going to win out in the future. And at least it seems to me like air cooled is obviously just the easiest solution, and also there's more expertise and more collective man hours that have gone into mastering that system. But I have a hard time believing that that's going to be what mines are running in 10 or 20 years. Maybe I'm not. I don't know, maybe I'm a little too futuristically minded or optimistic, but it seems like the form factor would have to change. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Right now, even though the air mining form factors are, different. You got shoebox, amp miners versus a slightly wider Auradine unit versus, the Watts miner, completely different shoebox. But the fact is, it still is easier to retrofit that air units from S19s to M30S pluses than it is to, drop a Watts miner immersion versus a Bitmain, S19 that's been converted to an immersion unit. And then, you've got Watts miner and Bitmain now making these 19-inch standard 2U and 3U units. That's of course going to be able to increase interoperability. But prior to that, Watts miner and Bitmain's hydro units were completely different form factors too. I wish we could agree on some like standardization protocol, and we could all just like wave a magic wand and everything's interchangeable, and you can buy the best miner for you, not just the one that your farm has been set up for, for the last 2 years, and you're stuck with what you have. I think that's, ideally that's where the industry goes as we mature. Hopefully people like, Auradine and Block, the small upstarts, will be able to take on some risk in order to gain some of the market share from the big boys.
So 2 things I want to pull out. You mentioned Auradine and Block. I want to put those aside for just a second. We're going to return to that after this next question. But my question following up with that is, you mentioned you taking S19 and dunking into an immersion, like basically retrofitting it for immersion. What have been some of the challenges for that versus the new immersion models, like the M66 that Watts miners come out with? Seems like the early immersion days were taking an air-cooled machine and modifying it for that. Obviously, that is probably more complicated than just buying one of these immersion units outright. What's kind of the difference between doing both of those?
So we were well aware of the man hours and the complications of deploying S19s and taking off the fans and putting firmware on, spoofing it, turning it upside down so you have the right flow path for the heat sinks and the sensors. So we just avoided all that ourselves and bought the Watts miner immersion ready units. You take them out of the box, you dunk them, and they're ready to go. Like, there is no easier deployment than that, really.
Really? So that, in terms of ease of deployment, that's one of the better ones. And so are you been pretty happy with the M66 and those immersion models?
Yeah, like we're using the M56, so a previous one. But we are quite happy with it. And just to touch on immersion versus hydro again real quick, I think because we came in pretty early to these immersion and hydro specific models, a lot of our trials and tribulations have been, PSU specific or, minor kinks or like server kinks that haven't been worked out because it's like pretty much the first generation. The M60S pluses or like Bitmain's S21 XP or S21 Pro, they've had many iterations of these air-cooled miners. All of these new hydro and immersion miners, like they're R&Ding these real time. As time goes on, they're just going to increase in their reliability and their ease of use. But like speaking to both the hydro and the immersion MicroBT units, like the deployment was so easy. Like when you're racking something that's between 5 to 10 kW, you can deploy a megawatt very quickly. And so, not really relevant right now when hash price is so low and you're not racing against the clock to get things energized. But, in the days of $300 a petahash, please come back. But you want every hash online as soon as possible.
Right.
That's the type of environment that justifies the CapEx spend, the increased CapEx spend on these hydro and immersion deployments.
Okay, so I said we were going to talk about Auradine, but I just keep getting these kind of follow-on questions. We'll get to Auradine in a second. But really, what is the CapEx delta? I mean, I know you probably don't have exact numbers. Maybe you do in your head, but I feel like that's always been one of the criticisms of a hydro and an immersion unit or deployment is the CapEx is extremely, well, not extremely, but it is larger than if you were just going to do air cool because you have to get custom containers. you have to get is for the immersion, you have to get the tanks. There's all of this additional equipment that you have to purchase to go along with it. So yeah, how much more is it compared to just doing a straight up air cool and then getting a container that has, extra fans and things like that?
Sure. I'll caveat this with, we might not have used the cheapest option, and we're a pretty small outfit. So we're not like buying at scale. So we're not getting the best, economies of scale and pricing wise. But in general, you can say hydro might be about 2 times the price of an air cooled unit, like totally installed, and immersion approaching 3 times. And this is rough, wow. Right? You could probably do a cheaper immersion system and get to like 2.2, 2.3 times the price of air. But regardless, you're buying immersion fluid, you're buying these tanks. There's just more to it.
Yeah, and with the immersion setup specifically, the complexities seem kind of daunting. I mean, but it seems almost like to me, like with anything, if you have kind of an accumulated understanding of the things to not do and the things to do in best practice, then you can execute and deploy very easily without having too many issues. But as I understand it, it seems like the biggest problems are making sure that airflow is obviously not the right word, but you mentioned it earlier, but kind of like the thermal flow of it, once you have it in the fluid, making sure it's set up so you don't have heat building up in one area. And maybe, I don't know if that's a good way to describe it, but, and also making sure that you're keeping the fluid cycled, after however many months it runs. Are those kind of some of the 2 biggest considerations when setting up one of these things?
I had never set up an immersion facility before, so we kind of really leaned on the Hayden team. We went and saw their installation there in Tulsa that they had ran themselves for a year and a half, had gained experience, have gone through deployments. And so really, I think what's important is, picking the right partner that's going to stand by their product and that actually cares. And I can say that, all 3 of the vendors we worked with, Upstream, Giga, and Hayden have been like exemplary partners and, have fixed things that go wrong. Because things are going to go wrong. Like I'd be lying to you if I'd say any of our deployments went 100% to plan, and even operations went 100% to plan, looking back 1 year later. There's always things that you have to work on and solve, but like we're really happy with, aligning with these folks. But back to the immersion, this is an engineering team that makes coolers. Like they're very aware of, thermal calculations. Like this is what they do, like moving fluid and cooling down fluid. So it's a matter of, designing the tank correctly so you're not getting these hot pockets, just like you said. Fluid wise, the stuff should last pretty long. Like it's going to discolor and, kind of turn to like a pea yellow after time.
Yeah, look like deep fryer fluid after a certain amount of time.
Everyone's seen the Clean Spark video and installation, or it looks like wow. It's like, oh man. we just dump blue dye in ours, and then it turns like a kind of nice like Cholla green. Like, all right, perfect.
It's like different flavors of Gatorade.
Exactly.
So roundabout maybe half a year, if you build if it has the right amount of circulation, you make sure you're taking care of it, getting the right fluid.
Half a year for swapping
in terms of having to cycle out the fluid. Like when
I don't anticipate, having to cycle it out at all. I can check on that. I could be completely wrong, but we haven't had any issues with degradation of the fluid and its heat rejection capacity.
That's wild. Because that was always my biggest hang up with both immersion and hydro. I didn't know how long the fluid would last for the cooling, but it seems like if you do it right, then it's indefinite until you actually have to change the system.
Yeah, as long as you're not, spilling it all on the ground, you're good to go.
All right, so we've neglected Auradine. We met up last in Nashville, and they had at Bitcoin 2024. They had a demo, and the stats to me were very impressive. My skeptical side of me, because we've seen ASIC manufacturer hopefuls come and go. In 2022, Blockstream purchased Mondoolies, one of the first ASIC miner manufacturers. that news has kind of fallen into the ether. I haven't heard anything about it since, right? And no one else really has either. It's kind of this, it's almost like this Mandela effect. It's like, did that really happen? But we've seen a bunch of different manufacturers come and go. But Auradine's model from the demo and from what I've talked to you seems like it could be the real deal. And it almost seems like the only consideration going forward is the same thing that Elon Musk has said about building electric vehicles. Building the vehicle isn't the problem. It's having the assembly line and the manufacturing capabilities to produce at scale and to produce numbers of these things. So you've tested the Auradine units. Could you just give us a quick rundown of some of your takeaways? Has it impressed you? Would you buy a pallet of them? I'm not going to hold you to that, but what's been your first impression?
Yeah, like full disclosure, we're trying to buy more of them for a future deployment. So we've been happy with them. Putting them through their paces in our air-cooled unit, really have just kind of set them and forgot about them. I like what they're doing with integrating it into like an energy system. We're not using it. We're using Linkcoin and Load to do our energy management, but Auradine has one integrated within the UI where it'll actually, so we're in Load Zone West. It could take Load Zone West pricing. It could take the actual power usage at the Auradine plug because their PSUs measure real power instead of estimating it like every other PSU does. Give you your real break-even efficiency and then literally tune up and down to make sure you're always profitable or turn off when you get to the point where you can't underclock enough to stay on. So I really like what they're doing. The product has been great so far. Like as everything, my What's miners don't hash to sticker in the heat of a 110 degree day in West Texas, nor do my Ant miners, right? And so
Right.
they might not hash to sticker, and Auradine does a kind of a funky thing where they just give a range, and like there is no like true sticker hash rate, so they kind of get themselves off there. But the efficiency is like as I would expect for like the price I paid, and you're paying a little bit of a premium to not go Bitmain or MicroBT. And once again, that's kind of something that Cholla is willing to do, like with Gideon's like leadership and vision. Like we want to support people that are doing something important. So like this is U.S. grown ASIC server manufacturing that we want to be a part of.
And it seems like the sticker price might be justified by some of these firmware toolings that you talked about, right? I mean, it seems like they Auradine, one of their selling points has really been that they have some of the most advanced manufacturing firmware. I would actually say, from what I've heard and from what you've told me, and from some other miners that I've talked to, it's better than Bitmain and MicroBTs because you have the kind of curtailment considerations built in, but you also have this extremely impressive feature where individual chips can falter and the entire hash board doesn't go down. Can you also tool that from the firmware to just dim certain chips if you want to? Like you can go on the chip level and change them, or is it just the fact that if a couple of chips on a hash board go out, the whole hash board doesn't go down, which we don't actually have in other models?
So my unit's one of the very, very first. I think it's the AT1500, and it doesn't have that feature. I don't know if you can actually go in and tool the chips down, but I was there when we saw that demo where they shorted 3 or 4 chips right to the chassis of the miner, and the miner kept hashing along. And I think that's incredible, just on a way to not take unnecessary downtime. One chip shorts on your S19 or your M30 S++, and you're down a whole unit. If you're lucky,
Right.
it hashes 2/3, whether you've got some aftermarket firmware on it or the What's Miner stock firmware lets you get through. But otherwise, you're out the entire machine. And so that premium on having that feature and function of losing an incremental like 0.5% of hash rate on a very rare failure is a huge plus.
Right. I think I didn't appreciate that at first because I have never actually run a mine myself. I've had miners hosted for me. There's so many of these little operational complexities that I'm always just blown away by. But the fact that you can have your unit short, like you said, a few chips, and then the whole thing doesn't go down is just huge. I know miners are going to love that. So it seems like for the Auradine model, both from an efficiency standpoint and from an operational standpoint, they sound pretty hardy, right? I mean, it seems like for running in Texas, the heat, the humidity, all that stuff, the air-cooled models are holding up pretty well, it sounds like.
Yeah, and they do sticker the operating temperature all the way up to 50 degrees C. And so that's well above 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So much higher than what we're getting in Texas. And if the temperature's that hot anyways, it's probably going to be a 4CP day, and I'm probably going to curtail anyways. So
yeah, so going back to, or kind of highlighting the absolutely brutal conditions in Texas, what system of cooling have you found to be the best for that environment? Or is it that every cooling system has a benefit in one area and a deficit in another? You know, what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, I'd say everything has its place. Everything has its benefits. If you have, the same cooler running to both an immersion skid and a hydro skid, they'll be able to cool them the exact same, and they'll be able to dissipate the same heat. In our specific situation where we're comparing apples to oranges, our immersion system has been able to run at a higher level than our hydro system has, like currently, with the least amount of underclocking or downclocking. Just like off the top of my head, I'm running and this is also a function of efficiency in our break even, right? Like we're not trying to, it's what, $40 a petahash a day. Like we're trying to be as efficient as we can. So we're currently underclocked on all of our air units via, brains on our S19s, and just like the standard power limit on our M30S pluses. We're in low power mode on like half and half on our hydros, and we're in just normal power mode on our immersions, probably pretty ready to get back into high.
Overall, would you say that, going back to the immersion versus hydro, sorry, just to pluck this thread out a little more, would you rather be running immersion or hydro when things get really hot?
So if I was probably hydro, just be like water has got a better thermal heat transfer property than immersion fluids, and we're using a single loop immersion, so we're not doing any braze plates. There are immersion systems that do have braze plate heat exchangers that do run just immersion fluid at the tank and then water out to the chiller. We're running our immersion fluid through the entire system. So okay. just inherently there, you're going to have less efficient heat transfer. When it comes to our hydro facility, we are running water, but we're not running pure water because even though it gets incredibly hot in West Texas in the summertime, it gets pretty cold in West Texas in the wintertime. And right. Because we're a price responsive load, we call it the Texas hedge. We're responding in real time to the real time energy market in load zone west, which is pretty much the western part of the state. So that power price is changing every 5 minutes and settling on a 15-minute basis, and based off of real time calculations done by Lincoin/load. We are turning on and turning off based on if we're profitable or not. And so in the wintertime, in the event that we have a high price event, we're going to be turning off our systems. My immersion system, I know the immersion fluid's not going to freeze and burst. It's going to gel up a little bit, but nothing that can't be solved by turning a miner on. For the hydro systems, we need to put a certain level of glycol in there, which reduces its ability to reject heat in the summertime, but it will prevent freezing in the wintertime. And of course, we could swap that out between summer and wintertime, but the juice wasn't worth the squeeze for us.
So when you're curtailing with the hydro units, do you have to take an extra step to make sure that system is still running to a point where you keep the fluid moving, or does it just stop at a standstill? With air and immersion, I could see kind of you just turn it off and you rev it back up when you want to. Is there an extra step with hydro? I've never actually thought about this, but is it more complicated? Is there something that you have to do to make sure that the system doesn't get bricked?
Yeah, there's complications to it all. For our hydro facility, for example, we aren't turning off the pumps because the pumps are not on a VFD. So they're like either on and off, and I don't want to hard cycle my pumps. But we've worked with Giga to put in some logic into the dry cooler itself, that if all of the PDUs are registering 0 kilowatts, basically a curtailment, right? Then it turns the fans off. So I'm able to save on that energy usage, either so I reduce my load during a 4CP interval, or I'm reducing my load when it's printing at $5,000 a megawatt. And then, with air, I've got VFDs on my fans, so I turn them down to, 10, 20% when we get to a level where prices are high or we have 4CP. And it's the same thing with immersion. I can slow my pumps down because those are on VFDs, and I can slow my fans or turn my fans completely off. And so, it'd be a lot easier for us to just deploy 7 megawatts worth of one thing and just go with it. But we really, we're working with all these vendors, trying to optimize the system, trying to make it as efficient as possible, reduce our load when we don't want it on. And it's been fun. It's a lot of work for megawatts.
In the competitive world of Bitcoin mining, one name stands out: CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner. At CleanSpark, efficiency isn't just a goal, it's our standard. Our sophisticated facilities are built and led by expert teams who care about Bitcoin and the communities we work in. Scale, we've mastered it. Our large-scale operations have set us apart in the industry as examples of community-oriented building. Our track record speaks for itself. We navigate the complexities of the new economy with precision and with skill, continuously achieving operational milestones. Curious about how we do it? We invite you to discover the story behind CleanSpark's success at cleanspark.com.
I want to get your takes on the new model that we've talked about from Bitmain, the U3, the S21, U3 S21 EXP whatever. This is, I'm going to share my screen really quickly for anyone who is listening and not on video. You can check this out on a newsletter that we have coming out, or it will have been published by the time that this gets published. But I'm writing about this model for tomorrow's newsletter, and it is a completely different form factor than what we've seen with hydro models or any model of ASIC miner to date. And it's basically a server rack form factor. So instead of just having a single unit, this new U3 S21 EXPH from Bitmain is in a server rack form, and that endows it with an incredible hash rate of 860 terahashes a second. And it also has a really good efficiency, at least nameplate of 13.5 joules per terahash. So just a few questions for you. Takeaways about this model. Have you seen any demos? I know they're not shipping until November or December, so you probably haven't. I think that this miner that I have on Twitter that is showing us their setup probably has some sort of privileged pipeline for Bitmain, so they got an early access. Do you plan on purchasing it? What are your thoughts about this, specifically with the form factor and the step forward and hash rate and efficiency?
Sure. So I guess the first thing I would say is this is the same type of form factor that the WhatsMiner M53s, M63s have. The power and the Ethernet are there on that front side, and the water is coming in on the back side. Bitmain has a 3U, meaning just like 3 units of rack space. WhatsMiners are a 2U, so slightly different here, but still interchangeable. The thing that was glaring to me was that it's only from 380 volts to 415. WhatsMiner made the decision to put their 3-phase immersion systems and their hydro systems from a range of 380 all the way up to 480. And so you can you've got a much wider range. Like a 480 277 transformer is pretty common in just like industrial practices for three-phase power. So it gives you access to more transformer options. And then of course, like the higher your voltage is, the less amps you're putting through it. So it could maybe reduce your wire sizing and things like that is like what I would think about when deploying at scale. I'm not sure why they're not going all the way up to 480. And for us, for example, like we're running our watts miners at about 465 volts. We did get some information from HM Tech, who are also some hydro miners, that you really don't want to go above 480 at nameplate, because then you start getting issues. But we really haven't had any issues being at 460.
So this is an interesting point to bring up. I feel like Bitmain does this a lot. Like for the S21, as far as I can tell, the inlet plug for the PDU or something, it was different than previous models, right? You probably understand that better than I do. But I remember when we reviewed it for Hash Rate Index when I was at Luxor, and this was something that we pointed out. And a lot of miners were kind of pissed about it, because then they have to change part of their infrastructure to accommodate this. Same thing with the T21. It just came with a completely different specifications when it came to the PDU. So this seems to be the trend with Bitmain, where they almost go by their own book. And I'm curious about the voltage restrictions on this. I mean, what kind of operational difficulties could that theoretically lead to?
So just like to recap, 480 is the three-phase power. That's line to line. It's the voltage that you read between the two hot leads. 277 would be the line to neutral. And so these new not the T21s, but all these new miners that have these specialized plugs, they have these specialized plugs because the voltage and the amperage is above such that your standard C20 or C19 plug can handle. So that was the reason. And I don't know Bitmain's newest models the best right now, but I believe they have a 277 version. And if you have a 277 version, that transformer would be able to provide you 480 power, but that 480 power transformer wouldn't work for this three-phase miner that they're putting out on the hydro side. So it doesn't make sense to me why they wouldn't, build a more robust PSU unit and cover all ranges of I don't know the technicalities behind how much harder it would be to increase the voltage rating. Maybe you could actually, tap down your 480 down to, 430 and it'd be okay. But I just don't know. And people won't be able to find out until they plug them in and see.
Right. And so that's the thing about this industry. Everyone's always learning on the go, right? So wonderful recap of all these different cooling systems. Let's close the show on West Texas's power market and Cholla's choice to operate there. And you use this term 4CP, and that stands for 4 coincident peak. Is that correct?
Completely right.
So can you explain to people who might not know what that is? And, I thought, I don't understand curtailment or demand response in the sense that there are obviously a bunch of different, I understand the basic concept, but there's so many different ways to go about it. And the actual technical nitty gritty of it is much more in depth than a lot of people think. So when you talk about 4CP, can you kind of go into the dynamics of exactly what's happening and exactly how Cholla responds to that on the operational side?
Sure. I guess I'd like to start with the 3 buckets of what you could consider like curtailment. One, you have economic curtailment. You're no longer profitable, so you're simply turning off your mine and responding to the real-time price. You could either be naked to the market, like just riding index, like what we call the Texas hedge, which Cholla does, or you could have a PPA, which gives you that access, the right to buy that power at that price. And when the price of power goes above that, you can turn off, and then you're essentially liquidating that power into the market at that price.
And that's what Riot does, that last one, right? Essentially.
Yes. They bought the access to power at 2 cents for however many megawatts. for 10 years. So when the price of power goes, 2 cents is $20 a megawatt hour. When the price of power goes to $5,000 a megawatt hour, they can turn off their mine and they get basically that $5,000 a megawatt hour less whatever their PPA purchase price is.
Yeah, they get a credit to their power costs on future bills.
That's exactly it. But people forget that Riot went at risk to purchase this power, and they were underwater for quite some time. And in last year, the power prices were the worst, since Uri. But before Uri, which was a crazy event like that winter storm, power prices were pretty benign in the 2010 range. So, Riot went at risk. They secured the power. That PPA that they purchased helps to fund new generation, helps to underwrite, more peaker plants, more solar, whatever it is that TXU, who they bought it from, decides to do with it. But Bitcoin miners aren't unique in purchasing PPAs. Everybody can go purchase a PPA and then turn off and then sell that back to the market. Your residential, or commercial real estate can do that too. The problem is Bitcoin miners do it the best.
Right.
That's the issue.
The load's flexible. No critical infrastructure relies on Bitcoin mining. I mean, obviously the Bitcoin network does, but mines are such a disparate and global phenomenon that a mine going down in Texas is inconsequential ultimately to the network staying up.
So that's the economic curtailment. And then there's ancillary services, which are reliability services that miners can provide to ERCOT, which is the balancing entity of the Texas grid, or most of the Texas grid. ERCOT doesn't cover all of it, but it covers the large majority of it. And Riot, this is another thing that Riot did. They were in the ancillary market, so they offer up their capacity, and it gives ERCOT the ability to either keep them on or turn them off. So it's not something that Riot would be doing anyways, because if they were doing it anyways, they'd be acting economically 100% of the time. They are providing a reliability service to ERCOT that gives them the ability that even if power prices are at $5,000 a megawatt hour and it doesn't make sense based off of congestion and whatever is going on in the grid for them to turn off their Rockdale facility, they stay on and they mine when it's $5,000 a megawatt hour. Of course, Riot has the PPA, right? So they're still buying power at that $20 a megawatt hour, but they're giving up the delta that they could have been selling into the market. And so the whole hullabaloo about Bitcoin miners not being able to participate in ancillary markets, it's once again it's just because we do it the best. And then 4CP is another type of curtailment that is unique to Texas. Like you said, it's the 4 coincidental peaks. It assesses your load over a 15-minute interval, like any Bitcoin miner's load, or even a residential unit or commercial unit, industrial. I don't know if it's actually residential. Don't quote me on that one. But commercial, industrial, Bitcoin miners fall in that one. So it will take your load in June, July, August, and September, the 15-minute reading on your meter where the load in ERCOT is the highest demand. There's all the ACs are running. Everyone's trying to cool their house down. It's likely going to be the hottest time of the day in the hottest part of the month. So what Bitcoin miners can do is turn off their load to avoid this peak. And because, like you said, we're just selling our hashes to the network, and our cost to not selling the hash is marginal because we're not paying our 90% of our input production costs, aka electricity. So by avoiding these 4CP peaks, you're able to reduce your transmission costs that are assessed to you. So it can represent a 10 to 20% savings on your electricity bill if you perform well. And so the performance is, 4CP is kind of antiquated because it more so considers the peak load when everything was served by firm capacity, when you have diesel, when you have gas, nuclear and hydro. Now we have so much intermittence and renewables. We're probably going to get to a situation where we're producing so much solar energy, like on a 115-degree day, that sure, the peak might be the highest, but the net peak, meaning the peak minus the renewables, would be quite low. We could theoretically be producing almost all of our power via solar, price being super low, but still Bitcoin miners are turning off, even when economically, rationally they'd be on, just to avoid the 4CP charges.
Is that unique to West Texas because that's where the bulk of the renewable deployments are in Texas?
4CP is a
not 4CP. The what you were discussing with how solar factors into this.
Yeah, so West Texas is actually the wind belt in the United States runs from North Dakota down to West Texas, north to south. And then the Sun Belt runs west to east from Southern California to West Texas. So the potential for Texas to become, and it already is the renewable energy mecca of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We're bigger than California in solar deployment.
Most people don't realize this. My mother-in-law was shocked. She's like, I didn't realize that Texas had the most renewable energy of any state in the U.S. It's like, yeah, it's because they have the most. The most free market energy market in the U.S. So exactly,
yeah, like the interconnection process is accelerated here. Like you said, it's a free market. It's energy only market. It's open and ready for business. So I think there's something like at least 40, if not 60 to 80 gigawatts of solar that's projected to be deployed in the next 6 to 10 years. And that's the size of ERCOT right now. So there's massive solar resources that are going to get built. And there's already 20 plus gigawatts worth of wind out there in West Texas. So for us, being able to, it's going to lead to volatility, right? Because if the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, then this is when the batteries are going to make their money, or when the gas peaker plants are going to make their money. But because we're such a flexible load, like via our energy management software, we can just avoid that. We're okay with it. Like we're not worried about uptime. Like we have no customers. I don't care if I have 85% uptime, as long as I'm realizing like a total like all in energy cost of $20 a megawatt hour. If you divide $20 a megawatt hour by 0.8 for like a 20% downtime, you're still like what, $25 a megawatt hour equivalent. So that's kind of our thesis. Like, forget uptime, be price responsive, be a good actor to the grid, and then take advantage of the renewable subsidies that the federal government wants to give them to give us
right.
cheap and free power.
Right. So that's the renewable energy, and obviously the Texas market for energy, but the renewable energy in West Texas was the big draw for Cholla, because you can basically take this energy whenever it's available at an extremely low price, because there's also an excess of it. I mean, West Texas is also one of the more sparsely populated areas in Texas, right? Obviously, you can transmit it to other parts of the state, but generally speaking, I mean, I feel like there are a lot of Bitcoin miners operating in West Texas for this exact purpose. And, I always go back and forth on the renewable side of things, because solar on a small scale makes sense to me. If for houses and things like that. I mean, I live in Southern Oregon, sun's out all the time. Eventually I want to put solar on our roof, but at scale, I've always wondered if it would just not be better to, throw a nuke down or another nat gas plant. But I'm curious to see what you think about the feasibility of solar as we go forward into this, lower carbon future, right? I mean, that's where a lot of policy is trying to push us. I don't know, like, are you bullish solar long term, or are you kind of neutral?
I'm agnostic, like selfishly, because the marginal production of a solar plant is like $1 or $2 a megawatt hour, which is nothing. I'm all for them coming out to West Texas, because they will get constrained and they'll build more transmission and chicken and egg type of problem. The nice thing about solar is, at least for the Texas market, in the summertime, the production more or less follows the demand curve. So you could have, net load on the system being completely supplied by solar. And then as, solar ramps down as the sun's setting, it's going to be peakers and batteries and some wind if it happens to be windy. But if it's not windy, we're probably going to get some high price spikes, some volatility, opportunity for the other generators to make some money. And that's why you're seeing a lot of like co-location of solar and batteries, because solar is cannibalizing itself, as I said. So you need to be able to sell power when the sun's not shining, and batteries are the way to do that for them. And then the other thing, just like solar versus nuclear, like definitely pro nuke. Love seeing the nuclear renaissance. RIP Germany on their massive generational fumble. But Jesse Pelton is probably the best solar energy abundance guy that I know, and he's like the number one follow on Twitter. But it's a consumer product now at this point. Solar panels are so the speed to market there is just absolutely insane. So we can deploy. In Texas, they're saying up to 100 gigawatts in the next 10 years. Like that is a lot of power. To go
just from the consumer market, you mean from just outfitting people's houses, solar fences, things like that? Or are you talking about massive solar farms in the desert?
That's probably massive solar farms. What I meant by it's like a consumer electronic. It's like a TV, right? Like the cost of production is just trending down and down and down. It's easier to make. They're cheaper and cheaper to install. Like the equivalent dollar per megawatt hour of solar is on a constant decline and continuing to get better. So, I think solar is going to have a real place in ERCOT and then all throughout the U.S. But obviously it can't be the only solution.
I agree with that, and I think once it reaches that kind of commoditization point, right, where it does become more affordable for people to slap on their roofs or have it at home. To me, it's a no-brainer in a lot of states in the U.S. to have that. Some of our family friends have it, and it is a game changer for their power prices in the winter, because they essentially sell excess production in the summer to Pacific Power, the primary power provider where I live, and then they get a credit on their energy in the winter. So to me, again, I think that solar has its place. I'm especially excited about it in terms of, like I said, more domestic production in people's homes. And I'm glad that you shouted out Jesse, because Jesse's always in my timeline, just, sounding the bullhorn on solar and batteries. And I think that's good, because I do think that sometimes there is this echo chamber with more conservative leaning Bitcoiners about, nuke baby nuke and drill baby drill. But we are going to need that, to your point, and we can close on this with regards to the AI and HPC revolution. So one of the biggest news headlines last week, I think, in the realm of energy was the news that Constellation Energy, it's a Pennsylvania-based, I believe, it used to be, I think, Pittsburgh Electric or Pennsylvania Electric Company. It's funny, it's actually a weird crossover between my personal life and my professional life, because my father-in-law owns it. And his dad owned it back in like the 50s or 60s. And, I was texting him about the news, but Constellation Energy is rebooting 3 Mile Island because Microsoft has booked a 20-year contract with them to provide up to 880 megawatts of power for their hyperscaler data centers. We don't have an actual price for what they're paying for the energy, but rumors and scuttlebutt say it's like $100 a megawatt hour. I'm told that it can be even more. That's insane when you consider that the average price for industrial power in New York typically ranges between $60 and $70 a megawatt hour. So to kind of close out the conversation, Bitcoin miners seem to be at a point where they're going to be increasingly competing with these massive data centers. This is maybe where a business model like Cholla is smaller, more nimble, focused on niche markets within the renewable sector in West Texas. Y'all might be insulated from this, but would just love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing in regards to the Texas market with interconnects, and whether or not this has slowed down on the Bitcoin mining side of things as talk of all these AI data centers ramp up.
Yeah, like broadly speaking, access to power is becoming more and more expensive. ERCOT specifically had, I think last year's growth versus the previous year, it was like an 8% growth year over year. So Texas is booming in general. So a lot of this excess power is getting soaked up just by natural, commercial, and industrial, and everyone moving to Texas. And, here's the place to do business. And so on top of that, now that we have data centers coming this way, it's kind of been, the blinders have been taken off, and the ERCOT CEO Pablo Vargas went in front of the Texas legislator and said, "Hey, I know we said by 2030 we're probably thinking maybe 100, 110, 120 gigawatts worth of load from growth. Well, we've actually revised this to 150 within the next 6 years, which is essentially a 90% increase of the current Texas grid." And so this is largely AI and compute data centers wanting to come to Texas.
That's just an insane jump. We're going to need a lot more energy, man.
Absolute insanity. And, there's, we take for granted, flicking the light switch on, or it's a very complex system. The grid is the most elegant and complicated machine that we have running. And ERCOT happens to be an islanded system. You're like, sure, we're not actually an island, but you could essentially consider us, out in the middle of the Pacific for all intents and purposes. Like, we are completely reliant on ourselves. So there's extra caution and mitigations that have to be put in place to make sure that the Texas grid continues to provide power to all the people within it.
That's a really good point to make. I don't think most people realize that Texas, the ERCOT system, and all of the different providers in it, it's closed loop within Texas, more or less, right? I mean, maybe some goes to Oklahoma. I don't think that's true, though. I don't know, but I feel like I saw a map a while ago where it's like Texas is, like you said, on an island, whereas every other power provider, whether it be TVA in Tennessee, which feeds power to North Carolina and also Kentucky, I think North Carolina, or, the California system, CAISO, feeds to other states. Every other grid is connected to other states, but Texas is a man on an island. It's also part of the reason why the shortfalls during Uri were so dire, because there was no other way to get power into the state. So, yeah,
there's a couple of DC ties, direct current. Most of the grid that you see running, in your day-to-day life is AC. So the DC ties to, the tune of a couple hundred megawatts, sub 1 gigawatt, was the way for Texas to interconnect to other grids without bringing in FERC jurisdiction. But, it's maybe 1%, 2% of the total load. So it can't supply us, right? So in effect, it is islanded. And yeah, this, it brings up why caution around these renewables, and it is so important, right? Because if the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, you still need to provide this power. And especially with a data center that's a firm load, you're going to need nat gas peakers. You're going to need combined cycle. You're going to need the nukes. We're probably not going to decommission any of our coal plants anytime soon. So there's an extra level of risk inherently in Texas, but I think the risk is worth the reward of the speed to market and the low power prices that you're going to get due to the renewables.
100%. Well, Brad, that wraps it up for today. I think we're just a little bit over an hour. We like to keep these around then. Super interesting conversation. Really enjoyed touching on a bunch of different factors within Bitcoin mining, from the operational side to the energy side. Before we hop off, give this a chance to show yourself and Cholla. Where can people find you? Where can people find information on Cholla? Shill your bags.
Sure thing. I'm on Twitter @ Brad Cuddy _ I changed my name a couple times, so now I got a janky one. Find me on LinkedIn. You can find Gideon on LinkedIn, shit posting there, trying to bring the memes to the work culture. But yeah, Cholla just wants to accelerate and bring energy abundance to all. That's our guiding principle, and to use Bitcoin to do that is makes my job fun. So I appreciate your time, Colin. It was a great conversation, and excited for another one.
Yeah, man, appreciate you coming on. And we are going to have another one at some point about oil and gas. Maybe we can have a roundtable with some of you vets in the oil and gas industry, talking about, the dog days of working on a rig.
Bring Gideon in, Griffin.
Yeah, it'd be cool. It'd be awesome. Well, that's a wrap for today, y'all. It's a quick shilling on my end. Follow us at the Mining Pod. Follow Blockspace at the Blockspace Pod, or at Blockspace Pod on Twitter. You can find me at As I Lay Hodling. You can find all of our content on blockspace.media. Brad, thank you so much for joining. Everyone, hope y'all have a beautiful week. Go enjoy the beautiful fall weather. Go take your girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, whoever out onto a pumpkin patch. Just go have fun, guys. Summer's over. It's time to enter cozy season. But have a good day, y'all.